This episode of All About the Gear is brought to you by BorrowLenses.com, who also provided the equipment we're reviewing today.
All right, folks, welcome back to another episode of All About the Gear. My name is Frederick Van Johnson. I'm sitting here with my co-host, Mr. Doug K., who is in costume today. I think he just came back from a superhero mission or something. He's out there dressed up with his 3D glasses on, which you'll find out why in a second. But more importantly than the 3D glasses is what we're wearing. Doug and I dressed alike today for the first time in history. Doug, what do you have on?
All right, let's show it off. Here we go.
Here we go, right there.
Right. There's
Boom,
mine.
baby. Look at that. Look at that right there.
Excellent. This is This Week in Photo. What's the URL for this stuff?
Or for the shirts, or thisweekinphoto.com/apparel.
Apparel, yeah.
Yes.
So I'm the proud owner now of an All About the Gear t-shirt. I have an All About the Gear sweatshirt, but I refuse to get the tank top because people like me should never be wearing tank tops.
Wait, tank top or wife beater? Are those two terms interchangeable? I don't know.
Yeah, I expect you to be in your tank top for the next show.
You know what? I don't have one. I have t-shirts. I'm a t-shirt guy. Come on.
Okay.
You know, I got to wear the t-shirts. And it's no accident that all of the TWiP t-shirts are black, because, you know, I wear black all the time.
That's true. You don't. I mean, your wardrobe is simple. You don't have any other clothes.
That's it. I just replace it when they start turning gray, and then I roll with it.
That's right.
All right, let's dive into the show, man. So we are talking about a very important camera, in my opinion, and that's the Lytro Illum, Illuminati. How do you pronounce it? What's it called?
The Illum, yeah.
The Illum, the Lytro Illum.
Yeah, for those who are listening to this in their cars, I'm sorry you couldn't see our beautiful T-shirts. You also can't see the fact that I'm wearing these very strange 50s or 60s cyan, red, 3D glasses.
Yeah.
We got this Lytro Illum, which we've been trying to get a hold of for a while. Our good friends at Borrow Lenses sent one over because they have all sorts of obscure things that you can rent, and they sent us this one. And so I'm going to take these off so I don't get a headache.
Yeah, that will get you. Well, let's dive into it, Doug. So that camera, which is an interesting looking camera there. So what's the price point of that thing? What if I want to get in one of those? What am I going to look at?
You're going to spend $1,600, and the original Lytro was only about $300 or $400, I think. We did a review on that. Boy, going back almost a year now, I think. But this is $1,600. It's a hefty camera.
$1,600, and what do I get for $1,600? Please tell me the lens is fixed on that thing, right?
Yep. It is a the lens is I gotta look it up. 30 to 250 millimeter zoom equivalent. So on a full frame, it would look like a 30 to 250 on a full frame. It's non-removable, and it is an f2 only, 2.0. And we'll talk about why that's a cool thing. But that's why it's so big, because it's f2, and there's a lot of glass in this thing.
Yeah, it's a big light scoop. So the thing that makes this camera unique amongst all other cameras on the planet is its light field technology. This is a light field camera, and arguably the first advanced amateur, semi-pro light field camera to hit the market. What is light field, Doug? What does it mean?
Oh, I knew you were going to ask me that.
How did you know that? We're like psychically, we dress alike and we think alike. What's going on?
All right, so I've been practicing this for a few weeks that I've had the camera, trying to explain to people what light field is, and I'm going to make a mess of it, but I'll give you a best shot. So if you think about the light that comes in through a lens, and it's focused by the lens onto the sensor, the things that are in focus obviously sort of converge on the points that correspond to the real-life objects that you're trying to photograph. But there's a lot of autofocus light that comes in from the edges of the lens and goes in different angles, and that's something we normally don't use, or we use it for bokeh or something like that. Well, the light field sensor is catching not just the light that we want, it's also catching what is the angle of the light. So in other words, it knows how much light is coming in and what angle it's arriving from as it comes through the rear element of the lens. Now, Why would you want to do that? The reason is that using some fairly sophisticated computation, I should say very sophisticated because neither you nor I could possibly understand it, they can actually reconstruct an image that's sharp at a wide depth. So even though they're shooting at f2, they can, for example, reproduce a sharp image as though it were shot at f16 with a very big depth of field, or they can have an image where you can move the focal plane, or the plane of focus, I should say, in post-production. And that makes the light field camera something that's very unique.
See, that's interesting. And the way you describe that makes me think of, two things. Either it's like half of a disco ball, right? So, and as light hits that disco ball, it gets refracted in whatever different directions those individual mirrors are pointed. Lytro with light field seems like it might be doing something opposite, where instead of the light reflecting off of those, it's capturing the light at those many different data points per pixel, so that you can then recreate the scene later. Is that fair?
I think that's right. My understanding, and again, it's a layman's understanding, is that behind each pixel there are actually maybe 16 small sensors, each one capturing light from a different direction. And then this is all massaged and put together by the processor and turned into a variety of image formats in post.
So Lytro basically took a fly and reversed engineered its eyes to create pixels, and then put them all on a sensor to record the light. Then D used some cool math to sort of construct the image after the fact, so that you can then change the focus. I just gave away their patent, Doug.
Yeah, I got to ask him about that, because that might be the secret, because think about it, you always see these pictures. This is what a fly sees. Well, there's no way a fly could see that. He'd be banging into things all the time. So anyway, yeah, something like that.
Okay, so then that's light field, right? So what's it good for? And who would we as photographers that have been shooting for a number of years / decades are used to making the decision at the point of image capture, or that decisive moment, as per Cartier-Bresson, or whatever, right? We're used to creating the image and then taking what we got back into post-processing and eking out the details at that point before we share it out. They're shifting that line of post-processing back a little bit. So who's this for, Doug?
Yeah, when they first came out with the technology in the original camera, it was all about the fact that you could focus later. Now what they're doing is they're trying to pitch the idea of a whole new type of image, something they call living pictures. And I don't know how much this will stick or not, but the idea is that these are pictures that, as somebody said, it's sort of the still images for this touchscreen age. So the idea is that these are really suitable for display on things like smartphones, in web browsers with the proper code behind it, maybe large screen displays. You can see these in 3D on a 3D television, although I've not actually tried that myself. And the idea is that these are images that up to a point you can interact with them. You can change the plane of focus. You can get a little bit of a perspective shift. You can do a number of things that you can't do with a normal photograph. And Lytro is pitching that as something that people will want to do. Whether they will want to do that or not, I'm not going to say. I really don't know.
Okay, well then we'll put a finer point on it. You, yourself as a photographer and as someone that has played with many cameras, would a camera like this find a place in your bag? Is it filling a need, scratching a burning itch that you had, or what?
Well, first of all, you look at the size of this. If I were to put it in my bag, it would fill my bag. Yeah. So no, I don't think so. I really enjoy the amount of time I had to spend with this, learn about this technology. It is a great camera to play with and to try and understand, but it's not one that I would use either for family pictures or for production work.
Okay. All right. Let's dive into the ergonomics of this thing. Body controls, the look and feel. The styling of this looks a little bit unconventional, to say the least, right?
It's real sleek looking. First of all, it's got this big ass lens, as you can see here.
Is that a technical term, the BAL?
Yeah, that's right. And it's big. It's not a very heavy camera, but it's pretty big. And notice it's got this rear slopey thing to it.
Yeah.
It looks like something out of some sci-fi movie, but um, it's it's really, first of all, it has no electronic viewfinder. It only has the rear LCD, so you have to compose using the rear LCD. And I think a lot of people will be using this from a relatively low angle because you get more dramatic macro shots and 3D shots that way. So I think tipping the rear display this way probably is a good idea. But it doesn't feel great in the hand. The grip's a little funky. The shutter release button isn't quite where I'd like it to be. So it's a little funny feeling, and it sure is big.
Yeah, and that display is articulated, right? So it pops out. It's not fixed.
It is. It is here. Like you can tip it up 90 degrees, or I can flip it down a little bit, so I can shoot from down low. I can shoot from above. It doesn't articulate, but it does tip up and down.
Okay, interesting. All right, so what makes it special? I know we were talking offline a little bit before, and you were saying that you were a big fan of the user interface in the LC, and how they've implemented touch with this thing. We get a lot of flack on This Week in Photo and All About the Gear for being fans of touchscreens. Now, this one, its only way of accessing the controls is touchscreen. What do you think about that?
It has buttons and wheels for the most critical functions, but the camera is, unlike a lot of the cameras that you and I work with, where touch was sort of added on, or there's a menu system that was previously non-touch and now it's touch. This is a whole new UI that's designed to be controlled through the touchscreen. And I got to say, it is perhaps the best touchscreen interface I've ever seen on any camera, and part of that is because it's all new. I don't think they went with the constraints that we normally see in the normal touchscreen. So here's an example of how you can go into the touchscreen. You can change the exposure compensation by just pressing here, and then see there's a real nice smooth slider. You can go just back and forth. And these controls feel really natural. It is as good as the touchscreen interface on any smartphone I've ever used.
Wow. See, that says a lot there. I mean, just, I look at this and I look, the way you describe it is, we look at the other cameras that have touchscreen interfaces and we're like, oh yes, they should have touchscreen. But the way you describe this one is that those other UIs were kind of the bridge between non-touch and touch. So they were making concessions and sort of, making things that you would logically want to touch touchable. This one went all in, right? Both feet into the pool. There are no other, very few other ways to get to the other controls in here, so they had to make it streamlined. And it sounds like, from what you say, they succeeded, right? Yeah,
I don't know whether light field technology is the future of photography, but I do think that this camera is going to be remembered as one of the best in terms of user interface, and I'm hoping that cameras of the future will adopt some of the concepts that they've used here, because it's really nice.
Okay. So then what else? So what else on the controls that kind of knocked your socks off?
Okay, so you've got a couple of wheels here that you can turn to adjust various things depending on what mode you're in. It has a zoom ring. It has a focus ring. These are totally electronic, and the zoom ring in particular is not really repeatable. It's one of those ones that senses the acceleration of how you turn it. So if you turn it one way and turn it back, it doesn't really come back to the same position.
Yeah, like spring-loaded, or kind of like for video almost, right?
Little funky. But one thing about this lens and the camera is the macro capability. It can focus really, really close. In fact, in the widest angle on the zoom, you can focus at a point which is behind the front element of the lens, which of course is not very helpful, but that just shows you how close you can focus this camera. And to be honest, to make the best living pictures, you probably want to shoot things that are very close in your foreground, and then also have a background to really get the drama of that 3D effect.
Lovely. And one of the things you mentioned was there's a button on there, like a special hyperfocal button on there. Yeah. Is that true?
Yeah, this is sort of cool. If you press this hyperfocal button, what the camera does is, depending on whatever the zoom setting is, it automatically jumps to the hyperfocal distance setting on the focus, meaning that everything from infinity to as close as possible, which varies with the focal length, will be in focus. And that's sort of nice. You just say basically, get essentially the greatest depth of field you possibly can by just pressing one button. I found that to be sort of handy when you want to take quick shots anyway.
That is really cool. And that's one of those, again, hats off to Lytro for pushing the envelope forward. I haven't seen, I'm sure you may know better than me, but I haven't seen in any camera, especially in none of the cameras that I own, that have a hyperfocal button on there. Is that a new innovation, or have you seen it before?
I've never seen that before. Never seen that before. Now the pixel peepers are going to tell us that with traditional cameras, there can't really be such a thing because the hyperfocal distance really depends on how large your print is and how close you're going to be to the print and all that stuff. But I think in this camera, because of the way it works, it might actually be something that's accurate regardless of the size of a print or anything like that. In any case, it sure is sort of fun to have for that quick picture.
Well, the other big question that comes to mind is, okay, this thing has a giant big-ass lens on there, as you said. Its only UI, or the main UI, is a really beautiful touchscreen on there. Plus, it's doing computational photography inside the body, which means a lot of processing. All that adds up to it's not going to be sipping battery, it sounds like. How is it on battery life?
Yeah, the battery life in the normal mode is so-so. It's a pretty big battery. Mm-hmm. But the beauty of this camera is when you throw it into Lytro mode by pressing this button. Mm-hmm. When you press the Lytro button, I'm going to try and explain this. It's sort of fun. It shows you this histogram-looking kind of thing, and you see there's a blue scale and an orange scale. Mm-hmm. And as I change the focus, you see it's got focus peaking. You can see that the foreground things are highlighted in blue. The background things are highlighted in orange. And anything that's highlighted is going to be in focus or potentially in focus depending on how I post-process this image. And by rotating the focus ring, I can move the plane of focus such that my foreground is completely in focus and my background is completely in focus, and I can change the focal length to make sure that everything is within the range that I want there. So when you're in that mode, that by the way is the best mode to use this. It's a lot of work, it's fairly manual, but that's how you get the best results. But when you use this mode, this thing is just draining electricity from that battery. I think you're talking about how many minutes versus how many hours.
Yeah, geez. So which is interesting. Again, I know we're going to talk about this at the end, the whole idea of who this camera is for, but the battery, is, it's gotta, you can't be going out in the middle of nowhere and have your battery die and you have a brick, right?
Right.
Yeah. So then, okay, lens-wise, we touched on the lens a little bit before. You said if it's a constant f2.0. Sharpness-wise, is it a sharp lens? Does it feel good? What does it like remind you of in your other kit?
Well, when you look at the images, I must say they're not very sharp. Now, I don't know whether that's the lens or this whole concept of what a light field sensor does, but this is not something that you say, wow, that's a really sharp picture. Mm-hmm. So, the system overall, I wouldn't say produces particularly sharp images.
Okay. Now, what about image stabilization at f2.0? Is it a fast? So it's a relatively fast lens. Does it have IS built into it?
No image stabilization, which of course when you zoom it out to 250 millimeters does make a bit of a difference.
Sure.
You got to hold still. You've got a relatively fast shutter in this thing, but the trick is because it's always shooting at f2.0, you have a lot of light hitting that sensor. And because of that, Lytro ships this camera with a neutral density filter that you can screw onto the front of the lens. And in bright daylight, that's something that you may want to use. So good that they do that.
So then you mentioned the S word, right? Shutter and sensor.
Yeah.
It seems like this is a brand new world. This is all the sort of other metrics are slightly askew in the world of light field. How did the shutter and the sensor feel to you?
I think it's so weird. I don't know if I can compare it to anything else. I just saw the movie about the life of Stephen Hawking, and black holes and all this kind of stuff, and it's sort of as appropriate for the fact that that's at the same week I was shooting with this camera, because it's very otherworldly.
Yeah.
It's a focal plane shutter. It's a 4,000th of a second at the highest speed. It can do supposedly 3 frames continuous shooting, but it sort of lumps along. It doesn't give you a true 3 frames a second. It's not an action camera by any means, but you might want to use it for bracketing. But it's people who are, I'll just say this right now, people who are curious about this technology, they need to go out and rent one of these things for a weekend, because it's pretty wild.
Yeah, rent it and see if you can't live without it, and then make the decision after that.
Or would you rather spend $16,000 on a couple of lenses? Sorry, $1,600.
$1,600. Okay, so then we touched a little bit on the LCD. There's no EVF on this thing. What was the quality of the LCD? Is it clear? Were you able to shoot in bright sunlight and all that?
Yeah, it's not a very high resolution LCD, but I found it to be very clear, very crisp, quite good for the camera. And when I had to crank up the brightness, but when I did that, I could use it outdoors. I wouldn't say it worked in great sunlight, but in bright sunlight, but it was good enough. And I think they did a good job. It has the zebra capability. Zebra means it shows you sort of a white area with black diagonal hashes through it when you have something that's overexposed. Some of us are used to the blinkies on our SLRs, the zebras, the sort of equivalent that comes from the video world. And of course it has this equivalent of focus peaking. They call it the depth overlay, that shows you what's going to be in focus, or let's say what can be potentially in focus depending on how you post-process the image.
Oh, that's interesting. Cool.
I should also say that there are a number of ways to render these images, but here's an example of one where the only one that you can actually get in the camera is called refocusing, and that's where you take an image that's been captured, and by simply touching on the different parts of the image, you can say focus on this focus plane, focus on this focus plane. So here's foreground, here's background, and that's the only way that you can actually review your pictures in the LCD.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, so then moving on, diving in. You see, we're getting a really good deep dive into this camera, and many people may not have seen this camera, or they may have seen it but had no idea what was inside. Now we're kind of peeling back the layers of the onion. So this is good.
And I want to say, a lot of people are listening to the audio of this when they're on the treadmill or in their cars, and I'm sorry that you can't see these things, but if you go to This Week in Photo and you look for this show, you'll see links to a number of the images that we have that will demonstrate the kind of things we're talking about.
Yep. Okay, so it almost seems like a weird question to ask, but how's the autofocus on this thing?
The autofocus is really bad. It has, it's got touch to focus on the screen. It has an autofocus button that'll basically just focus on the center, but it hunts like crazy. It may be the worst autofocusing camera I've ever seen, but
because it doesn't have to be good, right? You can make that decision.
Well, if everything can be focused after the fact, who cares? You can just hit the hyperfocal button and be done, right?
Yeah, that's like shooting RAW. You don't need to get your exposure right. You can fix it.
Exactly, right.
Shoot RAW with the light field technology. You barely even need to be there anymore.
Yeah, well, RAW plus bracketing plus light field plus hyperfocal. Why even show up? It's too easy.
Exactly. All right, so then what about manual focus? So it seems like this might be important on this camera.
Yeah, this is, like I say, showing you the Lytro mode that I showed was definitely what this camera is all about. And if you want to get the most out of this, in terms at least of what the inventors intended, you need to push this button and go into the Lytro mode and manually focus and really take advantage of what the amazing processing will be by using that preview feature. So it's a nice camera for manual focus.
All right. Well, here, I always go here in these reviews because lately I've been diving deeper into the world of video to understand it a little better. Does this thing shoot 4K, Doug, and does it have an audio input on it?
No.
No to both, right?
None of the above.
Of course not.
It is not a video camera. No. no, it doesn't.
But would that be interesting? What if Lytro could pull that off? A 4K light field camera. Imagine the processing power and the storage that would take.
Well, seriously, for motion picture production, being able to focus after the fact would be phenomenal.
Yeah.
Think about a close-up shot where an actor has to walk in and hit his mark, and you've got a shallow depth of field, and you want that close eye and one of those eyelashes to be in focus.
Yeah.
And if he misses his mark, you got to shoot it again.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be great if you could do that in one take and say, "Hey, close enough, we'll fix it in post."
Yeah. Yeah, it would be great, but I think of the computational power to do that and the storage. Can you imagine the storage to get those files out? And notwithstanding the processing power to record it, but to decode it in post-production would just be insane. But hey, we said that back in the day when we were like, who needs more than 640K in your computer?
That's right. Someday we'll have 1 megabyte floppy disks.
Exactly.
You can look forward to that, right?
Exactly. People, in the future will look back on this video and say, "You see these guys? What are they talking about?"
So everybody has a petabyte on their desk, right?
Exactly. So what's or in their watch?
Right.
So what about connectivity options? The Wi-Fi and all that stuff.
Yeah, they've got, there's no GPS, no NFC for Quick Connect, but they do have Wi-Fi. The app, I think, is only available on iOS. I don't think there's an Android version of it yet. This app does not control the camera like you get with most cameras, but it has some nice features in that you can download images from the camera to the iPhone or the iPad. You can then play them back, if you will, or render them in this refocus mode, so you can touch to change what plane of focus you want. Mm-hmm. And then you can also, from there, upload them to the Lytro website. And Lytro has a gallery of images. You have your private gallery there. There are public galleries and so forth. And that's actually a very good way to display and share the images. So the app is good for that, but it's not for controlling the camera.
And that Lytro site, if memory serves, is where folks would go to get the embed code to share these focus later images, kind of like YouTube. Like YouTube, right? You go there and you can upload your video, grab the embed code, and then stick it all over the place wherever you want it. Same with Lytro, right? Yeah,
same thing. You can just capture a code fragment and put it on your blog or anywhere else. I think it even works on Facebook. I'm not sure.
Wow, cool. All right, so speaking of software, what about the post-processing software? If logic dictates, then you probably can't import a light field image raw file into Lightroom, right? So how do you get in there to tweak your image and get it ready to upload to the Lytro site?
Yeah, they actually have something they call a Lytro raw file, but let's face it, it's not going to be processable by anything that's known to humankind.
That's going to need some alien technology to process.
The Lytro desktop app you download, it's free. I was on the road when I first went to use this, and it wouldn't work. And I contacted Lytro, and they said, "Oh yeah, well, you have a computer that's more than 2 years old, and the video card isn't fast enough, so we can't use it." So you have to watch out for that. You need a fairly powerful and recent video card just to run this thing. And that's a clue about how much processing there is going on. But when you bring up this app, it allows you to view your images, or let's say render them, in many different modes. For example, let me put on my 3D glasses again.
Uh-oh.
You can render them in the old style 3D using red and cyan to get a 3D image. And here's an example of one. It's pretty cool, isn't it?
Yeah, that's awesome. I wish I could see it. I don't have my glasses on.
Oh yeah, I forgot. Right? Well, it must look really funky without the glasses.
So is it actually popping out? Can you actually perceive the effect?
Yeah, I'm going to send you a third pair of glasses so you can look at them.
I know.
No, they're really cool. It's very effective. Now, if you have a 3D television, which I do not, but I think you do.
I do.
I will send you one of those images because you can actually render them in a format that's displayable on a 3D TV. And you can tell me whether that's cool or not.
And I could look at those because my 3D TV came with 3D glasses. I can check it out. Look at that.
And then you have the 2D rendering, where you can actually say, okay, what parts of this image do I want to be in focus? You can, for example, say, give me the maximum depth of field, which is in some ways as though you had shot it at f/16, even though you had all the light for an f2 lens. Or you have little sliders, so you can go in there and say, I want just from this point to this point to be in focus, and then I want it to get soft after that. So you have a lot of post-processing options in terms of how to render these as JPEGs, TIFFs, red, cyan, 3D TV, lots of things you can do on this. Or you can export them as videos. Now, when you do that, you get sort of a Ken Burns effect with your images where they sort of move around because the perspective shifts a bit.
Yeah.
And then it looks like a focus pull where things, pulls to the background, then it pulls to the foreground, and you can combine these to make sort of a nice presentation.
Wow. All right. See, I'm making notes here because I have some questions on the who this is for thing at the end. But before we get to that, we always talk about the competition, and most of the cameras that you've reviewed have at least one or two kind of direct competitors that they're going head-to-head in the ring with. This one, I'm a little, I don't know. I'm curious to see what you're going to say. Who's the direct competitor for the Lytro Illum?
No, there's. I can honestly say, to the best of my knowledge, there is no camera like this.
Wow.
And it
Except
doesn't.
for the cell phone cameras, right? I've seen some Android cameras that claim to do this. Is that different?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because I don't think it's the same thing. I really doubt that they have real light field sensors in there. They're probably doing focus stacking, meaning taking multiple images, one right after the other, with different planes of focus, and then letting you either choose one or combining them to get certain effects. I just can't imagine that a cell phone has real light field technology because it would blow up. It would just explode.
Can you imagine? Yeah, it's like, what's this burning sensation in my pocket?
Yeah. So I think they have, they're creating that effect another way. Because let's face it, that little teeny sensor that you get in a mobile phone has a very deep depth of field, and because the sensor is small, the apertures are pretty small too, and that means that any effect that's going to give you a shallow depth of field has got to come in sort of after the fact.
Yeah, you gotta post-processing.
Right.
All right, so the million-dollar question here, Mr. K, who is this camera for? I've heard you sort of casually mention artistic purposes, investigative, maybe. Who is gonna plunk down $1,600 for this thing? Although it's awesome, cool technology, in reality, who's it targeted at?
I'm just glad I knew that question was coming, so I could think about that.
Did you write notes?
Yeah. When we reviewed the original Lytro, the one scenario I came up with, which I still believe in, is security cameras. And let me explain why. Let's say you have a camera that's mounted and photographing a scene statically at night, and it's doing an exposure every half a second or something like that.
Yeah.
It's night, it's dark, you want as much light as possible, so you're going to use a very wide aperture, which means you're going to have a shallow depth of field, which means you're not going to be able to record everything you want. Well, with a camera like this technology, this is not who the camera's for, so I'm not really answering your question. But with this technology, you can have a camera that captures a lot of light where you decide later where you want to focus.
Yeah.
I do think this camera, you hinted at this camera could have an application in forensics. I think there are a lot of situations where you may want to record a crime scene or some other event, and you may not know what's important until sometime in the future, and you want to go back to the images and try and extract things from them that the photographer may not have been aware of at the time he captured the image.
Well, let's flip it on its head. So, the who it's for question, could this be, like, would you, after having played with this for several days, could it be a fashion photographer's camera? Could it be a sports photographer's camera? Could it be landscape? Any of these kind of like throw up a light bulb?
We're stretching it a bit here, but I would say this. I would say one of the interesting uses for this is product photography, but not in the normal sense.
Yeah.
Product photography in that when you get very close to your subject, you get a very pronounced 3D effect. So macro work, studio work, controlled circumstances, this camera is fairly strong. Now, having said that, the only time you're going to use those images is when you're making living pictures.
Yeah.
And then, therefore, you need to distribute them and view them in that manner. You know, you're not going to use this camera to make images for a print magazine. You're not going to put them as 2D images on the web. They're not that interesting. But if you have an opportunity to display them as interactive living pictures, I don't know what that opportunity is, but if you had that, then this would be potentially very interesting. I also think there's sort of a boundary case here, and that might be for wedding photographers. Wedding photographers are always being pressed into doing something new and different because, let's face it, they're doing the same thing all the time.
Yeah.
You know, that's why wedding photographers are being pressed into video. In fact, I think that's old news at this point. I don't know a single wedding photographer who doesn't shoot video.
Right.
They'd be out of work. So in this case, you know, you might want to have a second shooter or somebody come out with a camera like this, shoot some living pictures, deliver them in an album on the iPad to your client and say, look at all these cool things. You know, you line up the people instead of, you know, a straight line, you know, perpendicular to your lens, you put them at an angle and you get this nice sort of focus pull along the line of people. That would be
cool. Yeah.
You know, and somebody could sit there and say, oh, you know, there's Aunt Gertrude, and you just sort of zoom along.
Yeah, yeah.
So there are some use cases there that I'm sure some people will find, and I think one of the best things you can do is go to Lytro's own gallery and look at what other people have done, and it might give you some ideas of how you might put this to use.
See, that'd be interesting. The reverse of that wedding analogy that you drew is if someone shows up at the wedding that you didn't want to be there, you could throw them out of focus and be done with it, right?
That's right. Well, that's the Photoshop content aware delete person filter. Right?
There you go. There you go. Well, awesome. Very, very. You spent some time with this thing, man. So bottom line, is Uncle Doug gonna bring out the credit card to get this one?
Not me, but I really am glad I had a chance to play with it because now I can pretend that I know how it works, and that is just pretend. But I do think that anybody who's geeky enough should go out and rent one of these things because it will make you think. That's for sure. Yeah,
and hats off to the Lytro folks because you know we talked to and about a number of camera companies and imaging type companies, digital imaging companies, and many of them are, you know, playing follow the leader. They aren't innovating or doing interesting new things. Lytro is, you know, if everybody's in the sandbox, Lytro is over on the seesaw by itself, hanging out, doing experiments, you know, which is awesome that they're continuing to innovate and put effort and money behind this dream of light field. Who knows where it's going to go, if people are going to want it or not, or if it's going to evolve into video or what, but they're doing cool stuff and they're pushing the ball forward with this computational photography stuff. So they are, and they're not just making weird gadgets. This is a very impressive camera from every aspect of engineering and user interface, and I'm glad they're out there doing it, and I hope that it works for them. Yeah, likewise. I'm glad they're still here. So what's coming up, Doug, on All About the Gear? What do you have in your hot little hands to test next? I got 3 cameras lined up. One of them I've already started playing with, and that is this one. Oh, look at that! This is the Lumix Gm5, which sort of replaces the GM1, and I really like it. But I heard you have one too. I do. I have a black one of that one, and I love that little thing. It is you know, I had the GM1 and the GM5 replaced it, and it is yeah. I'm not gonna give your review away, but suffice it to say, I've only had it a couple days, and it is, as of, you know, earlier today, my favorite camera. So, I'm gonna give a little preview here. All right, see this little lens? What is that? That is the equivalent of a 70-200 for the GM5. What? Oh, that's the new one. Oh, that's the new one, right? Look how little that is. In the palm of your hand. That's a 70 to 200 millimeter lens.
Yeah. Now it's not fast. It's like what is it? F something or other. It's not even a fixed aperture. It's a variable aperture. But to be able to walk around with a 70 to 200 that's this big, oh man,
that's crazy. That is crazy.
Really fun. Anyway, so coming up after that, we've got the Sony A7 Mark II coming in.
Woo. Now, I know that's your camera of choice, the A7 series. Yeah. Are you going to pull the trigger and get one of those?
You're going to have to wait for the review. I'm not telling.
All right.
And then we're also getting the Fuji X100T.
I've heard about that one. Yeah, Wow.
So that'll be fun. I'll be busy.
Wow.
All right, that's what's coming.
Well, cool. Well, awesome, Doug. It's always a pleasure chatting with you. I now know that you know what I've learned from this review about the Lytro Illum, that I want to rent one and I want to play with it.
Yeah.
I think I want to play around with it and see, because you've got me intrigued with the quality of that LCD. So I think I need to take a look at that and see what the future of touch-based interfaces might look like.
Yeah, it's pretty slick. Very, very, very well done. Like anything, you have to learn it, but it doesn't take much.
All right, Mr. Doug K. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thanks, Frederick.
Yep, see ya.